What cannot be taught. In the eastern mountains, where clouds gently brush the rooftops and silence weighs heavier than words, lived a master named Kyojin. His temple was small, almost hidden among the bamboo, yet travelers from distant lands came seeking wisdom, not because he taught much, but because he spoke very little. One day, a young monk named Ren arrived, full of questions and eager for enlightenment. He had studied sutras, memorized the words of sages, and debated with scholars, but he felt something essential was missing. "Master Kyojin," he said, bowing deeply, "I have traveled far to learn what cannot be found in books." Kyojin looked at him for a long moment, as if his eyes could see beyond the young monk. Then, he simply nodded and said, "Then stay." He said no more. In the days that followed, Ren worked in the garden, swept the leaves, chopped wood, and served tea in silence. Every day, he hoped the master would speak, would reveal the mystery that had brought him here. But Kyojin did not teach. He simply lived. Ren began to feel restless. He had expected profound words, secret instructions, special meditations. But all he received was the daily routine and the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. One morning, while serving breakfast, he could no longer hold back. "Master, when will you begin to teach me?" Without looking up, Kyojin calmly blew over his cup of tea and replied, "Aren't you already learning?" Ren frowned, confused. "But you haven't said anything. You haven't shown me any path." Kyojin studied him for a moment, then said, "A bird doesn't need to be taught how to fly. It only needs to stop clinging to the branch." Then he took another sip in silence. That phrase left Ren even more puzzled than before. He retreated to the garden with a feeling that something was missing, or perhaps that something inside him was beginning to let go, though he didn't yet know what. Days turned into weeks, and Ren stopped waiting. He simply worked. He simply breathed. He simply walked. He no longer asked for teachings, and Kyojin offered no explanations. One afternoon, while sweeping the path covered with dry leaves, he felt the wind brush his cheek with an unfamiliar softness. He stopped. For the first time, he didn't try to understand. He simply felt the crunch of the leaves, the distant song of a cicada, the faint scent of incense drifting from the temple. Everything seemed to speak to him without saying a single word. That night, during dinner, Ren looked up and said, "Today, I felt the wind speaking to me." Kyojin looked at him and smiled faintly. When thought falls silent, everything else begins to speak. Ren lowered his head. Something inside his chest loosened, like a string that had been too tight for too long. He no longer wanted to understand. He was beginning to listen. One gray morning, Ren woke before dawn. The temple was still asleep, but the silence was so dense it felt full. He stepped barefoot into the garden and sat by the pond. The water's surface reflected the mist and the bare branches. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't searching. He was simply there. In that moment, a dry leaf fell from a tree and touched the water. The ripple that spread crossed through him. Ren felt his entire being vibrate with that subtle gesture. He didn't know why, but he understood something, not with his mind, but with a clarity that needed no shape. Hours later, Kyojin found him still sitting, eyes moist. "What did you see?" he asked softly. Ren took a moment to answer. "Nothing, and at the same time, everything." Kyojin nodded. "Now your true learning begins, because what cannot be taught can only be remembered." Then he left, leaving the young monk alone with the reflection of the sky. From that day on, Ren no longer needed words to learn. Everything became his teacher. The creak of wood beneath his feet, the steam rising from cooking rice, the sound of rain tapping on the thatched roofs. He no longer asked questions. He simply observed. One afternoon, while helping the master gather stones by the stream, Ren paused and said, "Master, when I first arrived, I wanted you to reveal the truth to me. But now I feel the truth was waiting for me in everything." Kaijin crouched down, picked up a smooth stone from the river, and handed it to him. "This stone has been here for 1,000 years. It didn't say a single word. How much did you know when you came?" Ren looked at the stone carefully, holding it as if it were sacred. "Nothing. Only ideas, desires, and noise in my mind." Kaijin smiled faintly. "Then the stone already knew more than you, and still it didn't judge you." Ren closed his eyes. He understood not by logic, but by the silent evidence of the moment. That night, the temple was lit only by the moonlight. Ren stepped out into the courtyard and sat beneath the eaves, just as Kaijin often did. There were no questions in his mind, only a gentle, formless gratitude. Then he heard footsteps. It was the master, who sat beside him without a word. For a long time, they both quietly gazed at the garden. "Master," Ren finally said, his voice calm, "why did you never give me answers?" Kaijin didn't look at him. He answered softly, "Because answers are like food chewed by another. They feed the ego, not the soul." Ren nodded. He understood. "And now that I'm not seeking answers, everything seems to speak to me." Kaijin turned his eyes toward him, for the first time in a long while. "What you hear now cannot be taught. It has always been with you. You just needed to be silent within." Then he looked back up at the sky. The moon was whole, and so was Ren. Over time, Ren stopped being a disciple. Not because he left, nor because the master declared him enlightened. Simply because there was no longer any difference between learning and living. One morning, while drawing water from the well, a young stranger appeared at the temple. He bowed to Ren and said, "I have come from far away. I was told there is a master here who can show me what cannot be taught." Ren watched him silently, just as Kaijin had once watched him years before. Then, without a word, he handed him a bucket of water and pointed toward the garden. The young man hesitated, but obeyed. As Ren watched him walk away among the trees, he felt a sigh of wind pass through his chest. He understood that the circle had closed, not as an end, but as a new beginning. The mystery he once sought was not a secret to be revealed in words. It was a truth that blossomed on its own, when one stops trying to understand it. That afternoon, Kaijin and Ren shared tea one last time. The master, now old, slowly raised his cup and said, "I have spent my life teaching nothing, and yet some have learned." Ren nodded, feeling the weight and lightness of that phrase. There was no doctrine, no technique, no method. Only presence, only surrender, only living with mindfulness. The wind slipped through the temple's cracks, gently stirring the hanging scrolls. Silence filled everything, but it was no longer emptiness. It was formless fullness. Kaijin set his cup down on the table. "Ren, when the heart is clear, there is no need to teach, nor to learn." The young master lowered his gaze, and a pure, serene tear fell into his still warm cup. That night, the master departed as he had lived, in silence. And the next day, while the monks continued sweeping leaves, cooking rice, and listening to the whisper of the bamboo, Ren remained in the same temple, without teaching, without speaking, simply living what cannot be taught.